more than we ever could. Now, I'd like to thank Ash Smith of WASP, which is Windrush Against Sewage Pollution, for a briefing on these targets. And essentially telling water companies that 2038 and 2040 are appropriate targets is absolutely ridiculous. It means they can sit back on their hands and relax. And I'm curious about if the government thinks they set the targets too high, that the water companies won't make any money, will go bust, and then we'd have to nationalise them, which sounds quite a good result to me. Now, as of this morning, Fairford Sewage Treatment Works has been dumping sewage into the River Colne for a total of 745 hours continuously since the 23rd of December last year. And I'd be curious to know what action the government's taken about that. Is that the storm overflows that the Minister actually was referring to? Because, of course, storm overflows are not storm overflows. They're constant. This isn't a storm overflow. So is the government doing anything about that? Now, the government has a target of reducing phosphorus by 80% by 2037, and because the current excesses lead to algae bloom and cut oxygen and kill rivers. And it's used by water companies to actually mitigate harmful lead pipe impact. That's because, of course, they haven't updated their pipes over the past 20 or 30 years. Now, Fergal Sharkey, whom we all know, has actually suggested that I take the example of Amwell Magna fishery, as it regularly has phosphorus readings way up in the death zone. Even if we reduce that by 80%, we still end up with a level of phosphorus that is poisoning the river. And I'd also like to point out you've used different base years. I don't understand why. You've used 2018 and 2020. Why use two different baselines? Is that because in that year the spillages were very high, and so 80% of a huge amount is not a particularly difficult target? So I would really like to know an answer to that. Now, to recover the health of the Amwell Magna fishery and the river there, you would need something like a 95% reduction. And given that 60 to 80% of the phosphorus comes from sewage, I can't see that even these inadequate targets are going to be met. Now, you've used those different base years. I very much want to know why you have done that. There must be a reason. And what about untreated sewage dumping? What's happening about that? I didn't see this mentioned. Is phosphorus measured at every sewage outfall and seasonally? Because, of course, it varies with the seasons and it varies throughout the day. So what is the... Could you explain that a little bit? And what about nitrogen from sewage works? Why is that not mentioned? We know that many sewage works discharge large amounts of effluent with very high levels of nitrates. Now, other countries have actually reduced ammonia from agricultural runoff by simple measures. For example, Holland, they've been covering their slurry pits. Now, I don't know exactly how it works, but there's some capital input, and they've had extremely good results. So why aren't we doing something similar? And why no overall target for water quality after 2027? And for example, if you're reducing, if you are committed to supplying water, would a standpipe actually cover the point about the amount of water supplied by water undertakers per person? Would a standpipe actually come into that definition? The only way to get clean rivers and a clean water supply is if you set high standards and you monitor it, and you have an environment agency that doesn't have its budget slashed all the time and is actually competent to do the work. And personally, I would, of course, like to see water companies taken back into public ownership. It's absolutely ludicrous that we let profit-making companies make a profit from something that we all so desperately need.
My Lords, it is a pleasure to